My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Today we celebrate the feast of the conversion of St. Paul, and with this we come to the end of the Octave of Prayer for Christian Unity. Now some of you might think, what on earth is that? I've never heard of this. And it's a shame because a lot of people haven't heard of it. And if you haven't heard of it, my friend, well, I ask the Lord to enlighten you to find out about it more. It's a wonderful initiative which the Church invites us to take seriously. 8 days of prayer for Christian unity. Jesus, you prayed to your Father for the unity of all Christians. You prayed, may they be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you. May they be one. Jesus, you want Christian unity. You want your followers to be united. And our unity is a great witness to God. And our disunity is a great anti-witness, a cause of scandal. So Jesus, help us to overcome all forms of disunity, both within the Catholic Church and within all Christian denominations, that we may evermore come together. So these 8 days of prayer are for that. And why is St. Paul the patron of the Octave of Prayer for Christian Unity? Certainly he's very beloved of Protestants. Many of Luther's ideas are taken from St. Paul, of course with Luther's interpretation, especially the idea of justification by faith, which of course for Luther was faith alone. Paul seems to focus more on local Christian community, more than on the universal church, at least in those epistles that Protestants particularly like. He has a very clear sense of his own authority, although we do see him submitting his teaching to the authority of the leaders in Jerusalem, Peter, James and John. But he also seems to show himself quite independent and even corrects Peter, as if he were his own man, his own boss, subject only to Christ, not to the Pope. Protestants would like all that. Now, I don't want to attack Protestant positions. This is a time of prayer in which we're asking for unity, not wanting to create disunity. But we could simply mention as just one idea that the pastoral epistles, 1 and 2 Timothy, Titus, do show a Paul with much more a sense of church authority, of a universal church. We see that particularly in Timothy, as does the letter to the Colossians. A sense of tradition. This also comes from some of these other letters. And possibly it's the case that certain Protestant doubts about the authenticity of these letters might very much be due to the fact that they don't like the ideas they contain. But as I said, this is a time to pray for unity, not dispute with Protestants. But it is in a sense strange that Paul is the patron of unity, because wherever he went, he caused riots. That's an idea actually I got from an excellent Anglican scholar, N.T. Wright, a very good, thoughtful scholar. Again, it's a fact that we can learn so much from our other Christian brothers and sisters. They have such wonderful insights to share with us. Paul caused riots, and maybe that's what we need to do, cause riots. There was that moment when Pope Francis was speaking to young Argentinians in 2014, and he called on them to cause lío. Now that caused a bit of confusion because people didn't quite know what lío meant, and you had various translations, the Holy Father calling on them to cause chaos, to cause havoc, to cause a mess. And people were asking, why is the Holy Father telling young people to cause a mess? Should they be dirty or untidy? Now that wasn't the idea. What he really meant, to cause lío in Argentinian Spanish, is the idea of shaking things up. We need to shake up society. Christian unity is all about Christians standing together to shake up society. If a person is insecure on the inside, shaking him or herself, their body not in control, that person cannot shake things up around him or her. And that's the tragedy, that the Christian body is too shaken up on the inside, too divided. Paul also had to deal with disunity among Christians themselves. We have that wonderful letter, the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, in which he tells off the Corinthians for their disunity. We read, "For it has been reported to me by Chloe's people that there is quarrelling among you, my brethren. What I mean is that each one of you says, I belong to Paul, or I belong to Apollos, or I belong to Cephas, or I belong to Christ." Paul was mortified, really saddened that there was schism and divisions amongst the early Christians there in Corinth. I like that reference to Chloe's people. The people of Chloe, whoever she was, were concerned about unity. So if ever I meet a Chloe, I say to her, you should be concerned about unity. Jesus, may we all be Chloes. May we all be concerned about unity. And our disunity in the church is a scandal. Our disunity among Catholics, sometimes Catholics break up into factions, and that's terrible. And we argue with each other, or our disunity from other Christians of other denominations. It's a scandal. Our disunity hinders the proclamation of Christ. People still today ask, as St. Paul said, is Christ divided? Because it seems as if he is. But standing together as Christians in society, we too, in a good sense, must cause riots, shake things up, challenge people. Why did Paul cause riots? And he caused them, we see, among Jews and amongst pagans. You see that in the Acts of the Apostles. Well, among Jews, because he claimed that Jesus is God and that there is a resurrection from the dead and that pagans can share salvation. For the Jews, it was impossible that God could become man, that a man could be God. This was blasphemy. Well, we have to keep on proclaiming Christ as God, salvation in Christ, God's love for man as revealed in Christ. We have to follow what the Holy Father, Pope Francis, stressed very much in his lovely document, Evangelii Gaudium, that we focus on the essentials. Again and again proclaiming Jesus Christ as God. And this continues to be scandalous for many. To how many people this week have you said that Jesus Christ is God? God made man to save us. This could be a good target. I want to tell 3 people this week that Jesus Christ is God made man to save us. The essential proclamation. But what really got the Jews mad was the idea that pagans could share in salvation. Their religion had become really fanatical, anti-foreigner. There's a moment when Paul is speaking to a crowd in Jerusalem and they listen to him more or less politely until he talks about salvation reaching the pagans, and then they go crazy. There's a riot. Well, we have to challenge people's prejudices, beginning by challenging our own. And people might have prejudices against other religious groups or ethnic groups or other groups of Catholics even, particular types of people in the church or colours or nations. We have to challenge prejudices and our own. Like Paul himself, who was the most unlikely of apostles, the man persecuting the church, and he becomes its great champion. Maybe there's a famous or notorious abortionist out there, a pro-LGBT campaigner, or a militant atheist who could become a great champion of Christ. Do we write people off? Jesus, you don't want us to write people off. You reached out to sinners. We have to do the same, knowing, of course, that we ourselves are sinners. Often those most opposed to us might be the most interesting because they have zeal, energy, ideals. And why did the pagans riot? Well, there's a lovely episode, you can read about it in Acts chapter 19, when the silversmiths of Ephesus riot. Why? Because they used to make a lot of money making silver statues of the goddess Artemis, and Paul was calling on people to turn away from idolatry, from believing in idols. And this got them furious because they thought that Paul would take away their money. So we have to call on people to turn away from idolatry, from false gods, from greed, from consumerism. As Christians, we must stand united to do so, to call on people to turn from false gods, which might nowadays be the false gods of fame, of sex, the body beautiful, idolatry of stars and celebrities, success, progress. And we have to call on people to turn from greedy consumerism. Do we challenge people about their consumerism, their excessive spending, their wastefulness? A life centered on having and shopping, it's no life at all. A big stress for Paul was calling on Christians to really live as Christians, to be Christians in name and deed, with a real transformation in life, a real ethics, a faith that affected their life. To become, quoting again an idea of N.T. Wright, to become in the Lord what you already are in Christ. Through baptism we are already in Christ, part of him, but we must live in him, in his body. We must live in him evermore, in reality. We must allow him to live in us. Our faith must grow till we become evermore in Christ. Paul talked of being a leaven in society that makes the whole dough rise. We have to be that leaven, hidden, very active, changing society. Paul was a man of enormous talents, drive, energy, learning. He knew the best of Jewish and Greek learning. And we have to develop our talents to the maximum. Maybe our capacity to speak, to defend and develop an argument, our knowledge of the faith, to improve our personality, to make it more attractive. So let's learn. Paul had his limitations. He was a little bit hot-headed at times, a bit radical. We see later on that he calmed down a bit. Perhaps he wasn't such a great speaker. There's a suggestion somewhere that that's the case. We all have to develop our talents and work to overcome our limitations, as we see in St. Paul. Above all, though, we see that Paul was a man of love. So the Christian Unity Octave is all about conversion for all of us. We all need to convert, overcoming our selfishness, our hardness of heart, and our pride, which is what creates barriers. And let's turn to Mary, Mother of all Christians. Holy Mother, we ask you to exercise your influence even more to bring about the unity of your children. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections and inspirations you've communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, St. Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.